She brought homemade dessert to impress her blind date. He took one look at her, said, "I don't do big girls," and left. The retired Mafia boss at the next table asked to try it instead. That one taste changed everything. Nina's hands were shaking as she stepped out of the elevator onto the rooftop lounge. Not from nervousness about the date, though there was plenty of that, but from the weight of the glass container she'd been gripping for the last 40 minutes. Inside it sat her grandmother's tiramisu recipe, the one thing she knew she was genuinely good at. The evening air hit her face, warm and fragrant with jasmine from the potted plants scattered around the terrace. String lights crisscrossed overhead, casting everything in a golden glow. It was the kind of place she'd never normally come to. Too expensive. Too polished. But Jake, her blind date, had insisted. "Trust me," he'd texted. "You'll love it." She spotted him immediately. Tall, sharp jawline, wearing a fitted navy shirt that probably cost more than her rent. He was standing near the host station, scrolling through his phone with the bored expression of someone used to being looked at. Nina smoothed down her dress, a simple floral sundress she'd bought on sale, and walked toward him, her smile already forming. "Jake." He looked up, and his face changed. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't kind. His eyes traveled from her face down to her body and back up again, slow and deliberate, like he was cataloging every flaw. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "Oh," he said flatly. "You're Nina." Yeah, she tried to keep her voice steady. "Sorry I'm a little late. The bus." "You took the bus here?" He let out a short laugh, glancing around as if checking whether anyone had heard. Then he looked back at her, and his expression hardened. "Look, I'm just gonna be honest with you, okay? I don't do big girls. I have standards." The words hit her like a slap. Nina's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Around them, conversations continued. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed. But all she could hear was the blood rushing in her ears. Jake shoved his phone into his pocket. "I mean, your profile pictures were all filters and angles, right? That's catfishing. You wasted my time." "I didn't." "Save it." He was already turning away, pulling out his wallet and tossing a 20 onto the host stand. "For my drink," he said to the hostess, who looked like she wanted to disappear. Then, louder, as if he wanted to make sure Nina and everyone else heard him clearly. "Maybe try being honest next time. Or hit a gym." And just like that, he walked to the elevator and was gone. Nina stood there, frozen, clutching her grandmother's tiramisu like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. Her throat burned. Her vision blurred. "Don't cry. Don't cry here." But her feet wouldn't move. She became aware, slowly, of the stairs. A couple at a nearby table whispering. A waiter pausing mid-step, clearly unsure whether to approach. The hostess looking down at her reservation list like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. Nina forced herself to breathe. She turned toward the elevator, desperate to escape, but her legs felt like lead. "Excuse me." The voice was low, calm, and came from her left. Nina turned. A man was sitting alone at a corner table, partially hidden by a tall potted olive tree. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile a long time ago. He wore a simple black shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to his forearms. There was a stillness about him, the kind that made you notice him even though he wasn't trying to be noticed. He gestured toward the dessert container in her hands. "Before you go," he said quietly, "may I try that?" Nina blinked. "What?" "The dessert." His eyes flicked to the container, then back to her face. "You brought it for him, I assume. He doesn't deserve it. But I'd like to try it if you'll allow me." She stared at him, confused. "Why?" "Because," he said simply, "it smells like something my mother used to make. And I haven't had that in a very long time." There was no pity in his voice. No performance. Just quiet honesty. Nina hesitated, then slowly walked over to his table. Her hands were still trembling as she peeled off the lid. The tiramisu inside was perfect, layers of espresso-soaked ladyfingers and mascarpone cream, dusted with cocoa powder. She set it down in front of him. The man, Marco, though she didn't know his name yet, picked up a spoon. He took a bite, slow and deliberate, as if he were trying to understand something. Then he stopped. His eyes closed for just a moment. When he opened them again, there was something different in his expression. Not quite a smile, but softer.
Human.
This, he said quietly, is the first real thing I've tasted in years. Nina didn't know what to say. Marco set down the spoon and looked at her. Really looked at her. Not the way Jake had, not calculating her worth or measuring her against some checklist.
Just
seeing her. Would you sit? He asked. I should go.
I know, he paused.
But I'd like to offer you something. Not tonight. Tomorrow. Somewhere public, neutral.
A café.
I have a proposition. A job, if you're interested. Nina's heart was still pounding. I don't even know you. You don't, Marco agreed. And I don't expect you to trust me. But I do expect you to need money. His eyes flicked to the bus pass sticking out of her purse. Am I wrong? She swallowed hard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple business card. No name. Just an address and a time. 2 p.m.
Botanical Greenhouse Café.
If you come, he said, I'll explain everything. If you don't, I'll understand. Nina took the card, her fingers brushing his for just a second. Then she turned and walked away, her chest tight, her mind racing. Behind her, Marco Moretti sat alone in the fading light, finishing the tiramisu in silence. For the first time in 10 years, he felt something close to hope. Nina didn't sleep that night. She lay in her cramped studio apartment, staring at the water-stained ceiling, turning the business card over and over in her hands. No name, no phone number, just an address and a time. What kind of person hands out a card like this? A smart one, she realized. If she looked him up, she'd find nothing. No trail. No digital footprint to obsess over at 3 a.m. By morning, she'd convinced herself not to go. By noon, she was on the bus heading downtown. Just hear him out, she told herself. Public place.
Daytime.
Nothing can happen. The Botanical Greenhouse Café wasn't what she expected. It sat on the edge of the city's botanical gardens, a glass-walled structure filled with hanging plants and natural light. Inside, the air smelled like fresh soil and mint. Small tables were scattered between raised garden beds where tomatoes and herbs grew under climate-controlled glass. It felt safe, deliberately so. Nina spotted him immediately. Same corner preference, same dark clothes, but today he'd chosen a table near a window overlooking a small koi pond. He was reading a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, and drinking black coffee. He looked up when she approached. You came, he said. Not surprised, but pleased. I'm not staying long, Nina said, still standing. Fair enough. He gestured to the chair across from him. Would you sit anyway? My neck isn't what it used to be. Despite herself, Nina almost smiled. She's Saturday. A waitress appeared, a young woman with bright purple hair and a warm smile. What can I get you, hon? Just water, Nina said. Bring her the lavender lemonade, Marco said quietly. And whatever pastry is fresh. I said water. I heard you, Marco folded his newspaper. But you haven't eaten today, and low blood sugar makes people make poor decisions. Consider it a business expense. Nina wanted to argue, but her stomach betrayed her with a quiet growl. The waitress left, suppressing a grin. Marco leaned back in his chair, studying her. Thank you for coming. I know it took courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing, he paused. My name is Marco Moretti. I own property outside the city, an estate in the hills. I recently fired my chef. Nina frowned. Why? He was stealing from me. Not money. I wouldn't care about that. Trust, Marco's voice remained even, but something cold flickered in his eyes. He was passing information about my household to people I don't do business with anymore. When you've lived the life I have, trust isn't just valuable, it's survival. What life is that? One I'm trying to leave behind. He met her gaze directly. I'm not going to lie to you, Nina. I used to be involved in things that would make you uncomfortable. But I've been retired for 3 years. I'm trying to live quietly. And that means having people around me I can trust. The waitress returned with a tall glass of pale purple lemonade and a flaky almond croissant.
Nina stared at them.
How did you know my name? She asked suddenly. I never told you. Your reservation last night. The hostess mentioned it when she was apologizing to you. Marco took a sip of his coffee.
I'm observant.
It's an old habit.
Nina picked up the lemonade.
It was perfect, tart and floral and ice cold. She hated that he'd been right about her needing it. What exactly are you offering me? She asked. A test first. Cook one dinner for me at this date. Something simple, whatever you want. If I like it, I'll offer you a position. Part-time to start.
3 days a week.
You'd prepare meals, nothing more. I'll pay you 3 times what you're making now. Nina nearly choked. You don't even know what I'm making. Whatever it is, it's not enough. Marco's expression didn't change. You took a bus to a rooftop restaurant. You brought homemade dessert to impress someone who didn't deserve it. You're working at least 2 jobs, probably 3, and you're still drowning. Am I wrong? She wasn't sure whether to be impressed or terrified by how much he'd deduced. Why me?
Nina asked.
You could hire anyone. Someone with actual training. I've had people with training. They cook like they're following instructions, not feeding humans. Marco broke off a piece of her croissant, casually, like they were old friends, and ate it. Your tiramisu tasted like someone had put love into it. Like it mattered. That's rare. Nina's throat tightened. One dinner, Marco continued. At my estate. Tomorrow, if you're available. I'll send a car. You'll meet the staff, use the kitchen, cook whatever feels right. If you're uncomfortable, at any point you leave. No consequences. And if I say no right now, then you finish your lemonade, take the croissant to go, and we never see each other again. Marco slid a small envelope across the table. But this is for you either way. Call it payment for the tiramisu. Nina opened it. Inside were 5 crisp $100 bills. Her hands started shaking again. I can't. You can, Marco said firmly.
And you will.
Because whatever pride is telling you to refuse it, your rent is due in 4 days. He stood, placing cash on the table for the bill. The address is in the envelope. Car arrives at noon. He paused, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. I hope you come, Nina. I think we could both use something good. Then he walked out, leaving her alone with $500 and a choice. The car that arrived at noon was not what Nina expected. She'd imagined something black and intimidating, tinted windows, a driver in sunglasses who wouldn't speak. Instead, a cheerful woman in her 60s pulled up in a silver sedan, rolled down the window, and called out, You must be Nina.
I've Rosa.
Hop in, sweetheart. Nina hesitated on the curb, her backpack heavy with groceries she'd bought that morning. Don't worry, Rosa laughed. I know Marco can be intense, but he's good people. Strange, but good. Come on, the drive's beautiful this time of day. Against her better judgment, Nina got in. Rosa talked the entire 40-minute drive about her grandchildren, her garden, the weather. She didn't ask Nina a single probing question, which somehow made the whole thing feel less terrifying. When they turned off the main road onto a private drive, Nina's breath caught. The estate wasn't dark or foreboding. It sat on top of a gentle hill, surrounded by olive groves and wildflowers. The main house was Mediterranean in style, cream-colored stone, terracotta roof tiles, wide windows that caught the afternoon sun. A fountain bubbled quietly in the circular driveway. It looked peaceful. Surprised? Rosa asked knowingly. Everyone is. They expect something out of a gangster movie. Marco hates that. She parked near a side entrance, and they walked through a gate into a courtyard garden. Lemon trees grew in terracotta pots. Bees hummed around lavender bushes. The kitchen entrance was propped open, and Nina could hear voices inside, relaxed, laughing. Rosa led her in. The kitchen was huge but not cold. Copper pots hung from hooks. Sunlight streamed through skylights. A long wooden table sat in the center, scarred and worn from years of use. 3 people sat around it, drinking coffee. "Everyone, this is Nina," Rosa announced. "Be nice, or I'll tell Marco you weren't." A young man with tattooed forearms grinned.
I'm Luca.
"I manage the grounds. If you need anything grown, I'm your guy." An older man with kind eyes nodded. "Antonio. Security. But really, I just make sure the gates work and the cameras don't." The third person, a woman about Nina's age with sharp eyes and painter-stained hands, raised her mug in greeting. "Sophia. I don't actually work here. I'm Luca's sister and Marco's goddaughter. I just come for the free food." They were so normal. "Where's Marco?" Nina asked. "Study," Antonio said. "He'll come down when you start cooking. He doesn't like to hover." Rosa patted Nina's shoulder. "The kitchen's yours, honey. Everything you need should be here, but if not, just ask. We'll be around." Then, impossibly, they all left. Nina stood alone in the enormous kitchen, her heart pounding. "What am I doing?" She unpacked her groceries slowly, laying them out on the counter. She hadn't planned anything elaborate. She couldn't afford to. Just the ingredients for the meal that always made her feel safe. Her mother's lemon chicken with roasted potatoes and green beans. Simple. Honest. She found a cutting board, a good knife, and got to work. As she cooked, the anxiety began to fade. This was familiar. The rhythm of chopping garlic, the sizzle of olive oil, the smell of lemon zest and fresh rosemary. Her hands knew what to do. She didn't notice Marco enter. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. Nina had pulled her hair back, and there was flour on her cheek. She was humming something under her breath, unconscious, unself-conscious. "It smells like home," he said quietly. Nina jumped, nearly dropping a spoon.
Jesus.
"You scared me." "Sorry," he moved into the kitchen, keeping a respectful distance. "How's it going?"
Fine.
"Good." I think Nina wiped her hands on a towel. "It's nothing fancy."
Just something my mom used to make.
"Those are always the best meals." Marco glanced at the chicken roasting in the oven, the potatoes golden and crispy around the edges. "May I sit?" "It's your kitchen." Today it's yours, but he sat anyway, at the far end of the long table, where he could see her but not intrude. They didn't talk much as Nina finished cooking. Marco read through some papers. Rosa came through once to steal a roasted potato and declared it perfection. The late afternoon sun turned everything golden. When Nina finally plated the meal, simple white dishes, nothing fancy, and set it in front of Marco, her hands were trembling again. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork and took a bite of the chicken. He chewed slowly,
Set down his fork.
and smiled. It was small, almost shy, but it transformed his entire face. He looked younger.
Human.
"When can you start?" he asked. Nina's breath caught. You want me to work here? 3 days a week. Wednesdays, Fridays, Sundays. Rosa will drive you until you're comfortable. You cook meals, whatever you want. I trust your judgment." He paused. "Does that work for you?" Nina looked around the kitchen. The sunlight, the lemon trees visible through the window, the warmth. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, it works." Marco nodded, something like relief crossing his face. "Good," he said simply, and went back to eating. For the first time in months, Nina felt like she could breathe. The first 2 weeks felt like living in 2 different worlds. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Nina worked her regular jobs. A morning shift at a bakery where the owner yelled, an evening shift at a call center where people yelled. Her apartment with its broken heater and loud neighbors. Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, the estate, where people said please and thank you, where Rosa picked her up with a thermos of coffee, where the kitchen smelled like herbs and sunlight.
It was disorienting.
On her third Wednesday, Nina arrived early. Rosa had texted, taking grandson to doctor. Luca will get you. He drives like a maniac. Hold on tight. Luca did indeed drive like a maniac, taking the winding hill roads at speeds that made Nina grip the door handle. But he was cheerful about it. Marco's in a good mood lately, he said, downshifting around a curve. First time in years, honestly. Rosa says it's because someone's actually cooking food with flavor again. What was the old chef like? Nina asked. Luca's expression darkened. Talented but slimy. Always on his phone in corners. Always asking weird questions about Marco's schedule, who visited. When shipments came, he glanced at her. You know what Marco used to do, right? He mentioned he was retired. That's a polite way to put it. Luca pulled through the estate gates. Look, I don't know everything, and I don't want to. But Marco got out 3 years ago. Paid off the right people, burned the right bridges. He just wants peace now. That chef threatened that. Nina's stomach tightened. What happened to him? Nothing dramatic. Marco just made sure he couldn't work in the city again. Luca parked and grinned. Mark's not violent anymore. He's just thorough. Inside, Nina found the kitchen already active. Antonio was fixing a loose cabinet hinge. Sophia sat at the table, sketching in a large notebook. Morning, Nina, Sophia called. Fair warning, Marco wants to help today. Help. He's on a kick about learning to cook. It's adorable and tragic. Sophia showed her sketch, a surprisingly good portrait of Rosa laughing. I give him 10 minutes before he cuts himself. She was wrong. Marco lasted 15 minutes. He appeared just as Nina was prepping vegetables for a minestrone soup, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans instead of his usual dark button-down. It made him look oddly vulnerable. Teach me something, he said without preamble. Nina blinked. What? To cook. Something simple. He washed his hands at the sink. I can make coffee and toast. That's the extent of it. Seems pathetic for a man my age. It's not pathetic. It is. He dried his hands. What can I do? Nina handed him a cutting board and a knife. Dice these tomatoes. Small cubes. She demonstrated on one, then watched as Marco attempted his first cut. It was bad. Uneven chunks, some huge, some tiny. Like this? He asked seriously. Nina bit back a smile. Maybe a little more. Uniform? Marco frowned at the tomato like it had personally offended him. He tried again. Worse. From the table, Sophia was barely containing her laughter. Here, Nina moved beside him, gently repositing his fingers. Hold it like this. Let the knife do the work. Marco went very still. Not uncomfortable, just aware. This was the closest they'd stood to each other. Better? He asked quietly. Better. He managed 3 decent cuts before the knife slipped and nicked his thumb. Damn, he muttered. I told you, Sophia crowed. Nina was already grabbing the first aid kit Rosa kept by the sink. Let me see. It's nothing. Let me see. Marco held out his hand. The cut was small but bleeding. Nina cleaned it efficiently, applied antiseptic, wrapped it in a bandage. Her touch was gentle, professional. You're good at this, Marco observed. I have younger cousins. They're chaos in human form. She finished the bandage. No more knife work for you today. What can I do? Stir the pot. You can't hurt yourself stirring. Marco actually smiled. Don't underestimate me. They fell into an easy rhythm. Nina chopped and seasoned. Marco stirred and asked questions. Why this herb? How do you know when it's ready? What did your mother teach you first? Nina found herself talking more than she had in months. About her grandmother's kitchen in the countryside. About learning to bake during her parents' divorce because it was the only thing that made sense. About how food was the only language she'd ever been fluent in. Marco listened like every word mattered. When Rosa arrived later with containers to take soup home, she stopped in the doorway, surprised. Nina and Marco sat at the kitchen table, sharing the minestrone, talking quietly. Marco was laughing, actually laughing, at something Nina said about her disastrous attempt to make croissants once. The late afternoon sun cut through the windows, turning everything amber and gold. Rosa pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. Not for anyone else. Just to remember the moment everything started to shift. 3 weeks in, and Nina had stopped looking over her shoulder when Rosa picked her up. The estate had become something unexpected, a refuge. She'd started staying later, having coffee on the terrace after dinner, talking with Marco about everything and nothing. He asked about her day. She asked about the books he was reading. Neither pushed for more than the other wanted to give. It felt fragile and precious, like something that might break if examined too closely. On Saturday, her day off from the estate, Nina decided to explore the downtown night market. She needed ingredients for Sunday's dinner and wanted something special. Marco had mentioned loving mushrooms, and the market had a vendor who sold wild forage varieties. The market sprawled across 3 blocks, strings of lights crisscrossing between stalls selling everything from fresh produce to handmade jewelry. The air smelled like grilled meat and incense. A street musician played violin somewhere in the distance. Nina was examining a basket of chanterelles when she felt it. The prickle on the back of her neck. The sensation of being watched. She turned. 2 men stood a few stalls away, not quite looking at her, but not quite looking away either. Both wore casual clothes, jeans, plain jackets, but there was something identical in their posture. Military straight. Alert. Nina told herself she was being paranoid. She paid for the mushrooms and moved to the next stall. The men followed. Her heart began to pound. She cut through a crowded section, weaving between families and couples. When she glanced back, the men had closed the distance. Nina's mouth went dry. She ducked into a stall selling scarves, pretending to browse, her hands shaking. The vendor, an elderly woman, gave her a concerned look. "You okay, honey?" Before Nina could answer, one of the men appeared beside her. Up close, he looked ordinary. Forgettable face, neutral expression. But his eyes were cold and flat. "Nina, right?" he said conversationally, like they were old friends. She couldn't speak. The second man appeared on her other side, boxing her in. He picked up a scarf, examined it casually. "We just want to have a quick conversation," the first man said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. That made it worse. "About your new job." "I don't know what." "The Moretti estate," he said it so quietly that only she could hear. "Pretty place. Good kitchen. But here's the thing, Marco's made some people uncomfortable with his retirement. They want to make sure he stays retired. That he's not planning anything." Nina's legs felt weak. "He's not. He just—" "We believe you." The second man set down the scarf. "But see, you're in his house 3 days a week. You see things. Hear things. We'd like you to share those things with us. Nothing dramatic. Just keep us informed." "I can't." "You can," the first man smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Nina had ever seen. "Or you can quit. Walk away. Tonight. Block his number. Don't go back." "And if I don't?" The smile widened. "Then we'll assume you're part of whatever Marco's planning. And that would be unfortunate. For everyone." He reached out and gently, almost tenderly, adjusted the collar of her jacket. "You seem like a nice girl. Smart. We'd hate to see you get hurt because you picked the wrong employer." He stepped back. "Think about it. You have until Wednesday to decide." Then both men simply melted into the crowd. Nina stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might be sick. The vendor was staring at her, frightened. "Should I call someone?" the woman whispered. Nina shook her head. She didn't trust her voice. She left the market in a daze, clutching her bag of mushrooms. The bus ride home was a blur. Every shadow looked threatening. Every stranger could be watching. When she finally locked herself in her apartment, she sat on the floor with her back against the door and let herself shake. She should quit. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. But when she closed her eyes, She saw Marco's rare smile, Rosa's kindness, the sunlit kitchen, the first place in years where she'd felt like she mattered. Nina pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She typed. Something happened.
Can we talk?
Then she stared at it for 10 minutes, her thumb hovering over send. Marco had been honest about his past, about the dangers of his old life. But he'd also promised she could walk away anytime, no consequences. Was this the consequence, anyway? Nina deleted the message. Retyped it. Deleted it again. Finally, at midnight, she sent something simpler. Are you awake? The response came in seconds. Yes. What's wrong? Nina's eyes burned with tears. She hadn't let herself cry at the market. I think I need help, she typed.
Address. Now.
She sent it. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at her door. Quiet, controlled, nothing like her panicked heartbeat. Nina looked through the peephole. Marco stood in the hallway, alone, still wearing house clothes like he'd left the moment she'd texted. She opened the door. Tell me everything, he said quietly. And for the first time since the market, Nina felt like she could breathe. Nina's apartment was smaller than Marco expected. One room that served as bedroom, kitchen, and living space. A bathroom the size of a closet. Water stains on the ceiling. The radiator clanked and hissed. She'd been living like this while cooking in his restaurant-sized kitchen. The thought made something twist in his chest. Sit, he said gently, gesturing to the worn couch that doubled as her bed. Nina sat. She'd stopped shaking, but her face was pale, hands clasped tight in her lap. Marco pulled over the only chair, a folding one, and sat across from her, close but not crowding. Start from the beginning. Every detail you remember. She told him everything. The men at the market. Their faces, ordinary, forgettable. What they'd said. How they'd moved. The way one had touched her collar. Marco's expression never changed. He didn't interrupt, didn't react. But Nina noticed his hands, resting on his knees, utterly still. The kind of stillness that came from extreme control. When she finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. Did they hurt you? Marco asked. His voice was soft, almost gentle.
No.
They just... Did they threaten you physically? Not exactly. It was more Nina struggled for words. Implied. Like they didn't need to say it out loud.
Marco nodded slowly.
That's the Castellano family style. Polite menace, he looked at her directly. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you want to quit? Walk away from the estate? Nina's throat tightened. No judgment, Marco continued. You didn't sign up for this. If you want out, I'll make sure you're protected until this is resolved. I'll give you 6 months' salary. References. Whatever you need to start somewhere else. Nina stared at him. You do that? Of course, he seemed surprised she'd ask. This is my mess, not yours. You stumbled into the edge of a world you don't belong in. But I don't want to quit. The words came out stronger than Nina expected. She realized, as she said them, that they were true. Marco studied her face.
Why?
Because for the first time in 2 years, I wake up and I'm not miserable. I actually look forward to Wednesdays, Nina's voice cracked slightly. And I'm tired of running every time something scares me. My ex scared me. My landlord scares me. My boss at the bakery scares me. I'm tired of giving up things that make me happy because someone else decided I shouldn't have them. Something shifted in Marco's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Okay, he said quietly. Then we handle it differently. How? Marco pulled out his phone. The Castellanos have been trying to pull me back in for 3 years. They can't accept that I'm actually retired. They think it's a strategy, that I'm planning something. He started typing. They're not entirely wrong to be paranoid. I still have resources, people who owe me favors, information they'd prefer stayed buried. You're going to threaten them back? No, Marco looked up. I'm going to dismantle them. Quietly.
Completely.
So they can't threaten anyone again. Nina's eyes widened. I thought you were retired. I am. But retirement doesn't mean powerless, he made a call, putting it on speaker. It rang twice before a woman answered.
Marco Moretti.
I'll be damned. Hello, Detective Rains. I thought you were dead. Or in prison. What's it been? 3 years.
About that.
I need a favor. The woman laughed. Of course you do. The Castellanos are operating a money laundering scheme through that new waterfront development. I can give you account numbers, dates, and the names of the city officials they've bribed. Enough to build an airtight case. Silence. Then, why would you give me this? Because they threaten someone under my protection. Someone who has nothing to do with our world. Marco's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. And I'm too old and too tired to handle this the old way. Protection, huh? Rains sounded amused. You've gone soft, Moretti. Perhaps. Do you want the information or not? Send it. If it's solid, I'll make sure it gets to the right people. Marco hung up and made 2 more calls. One to someone named Victor, who apparently had connections to federal financial regulators. Another to someone called the accountant who spoke in numbers and codes Nina didn't understand. 20 minutes later, Marco set down his phone. What happens now?
Nina asked.
Now we wait. The Castellanos will start feeling pressure from multiple directions, legal, financial, political. Their attention will shift from me to survival. It'll take a few weeks, maybe a month. And in the meantime, Antonio will drive you to and from the estate. You don't go anywhere alone, Marco's expression softened.
I'm sorry, Nina.
I should have anticipated this. How could you? Because I know how they think. They see kindness as weakness. Connection as leverage. He stood, looked around her apartment again. Pack a bag. What? There's a guest house on the estate. Small, private. Stay there until this is resolved. I can't just. Yes, you can. Marco's tone left no room for argument. Please. Nina looked at him, this man who'd offered her a job after watching her be humiliated. Who'd learned to dice tomatoes just to spend time in the kitchen with her. Who'd driven across the city at midnight because she'd asked for help. Okay, she whispered.
Marco Nadid.
Pack. I'll wait. The guest house was a small stone cottage tucked behind the main estate, surrounded by jasmine vines and olive trees. It had a bedroom with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and windows that overlooked the valley. Nina had never lived anywhere so beautiful. It's too much, she protested when Marco showed it to her that first night. It's practical, he'd replied. And it has good locks. That had been 2 weeks ago. Now, Nina had fallen into a strange new rhythm. She'd quit her other jobs, Marco had insisted, offering to pay her a full-time salary even though she only cooked 3 days a week. The rest of her time, she spent reading in the garden, experimenting with recipes, and having long conversations with Rosa over morning coffee.
She was happy.
And terrified that it couldn't last. Marco had become quieter, more distant. Not cold. Never cold, but preoccupied. She'd see him on phone calls at odd hours, speaking in Italian or Russian. Papers spread across his study desk. Antonio coming and going at strange times. He was keeping his promise. Dismantling the Castellanos piece by piece. She just didn't know if it was working. On the 15th day, Rosa burst into the kitchen where Nina was kneading bread dough. Turn on the news, she said breathlessly. Channel 7. Nina wiped her hands and followed Rosa to the small TV in the corner. The headline read, Federal agents raid Castellano construction offices. Footage showed men in FBI jackets carrying boxes out of a downtown high-rise. A reporter spoke into the camera. Allegations of money laundering, bribery of city officials, and connections to organized crime. Sources say this is part of a larger investigation that has been building for months. Nina's heart pounded. Did Marco? Show watch. The reporter continued. 3 city council members have already resigned. Bank accounts have been frozen. The Castellano family patriarch, Vincent Castellano, was taken into federal custody this morning. Nina sank into a chair. Rosa squeezed her shoulder. It's almost over, Mija. But it wasn't.
Not yet.
Over the next week, Nina watched the dominoes fall. A shipping company the Castellanos owned was raided. Illegal cargo, weapons, counterfeit goods seized at the docks. 2 judges who'd been on their payroll were suspended pending investigation. A lieutenant in their organization turned informant, trading testimony for immunity. The Castellanos didn't collapse spectacularly. They eroded. Each day brought a new leak, a new investigation, a new defection. Marco never mentioned it directly, but Nina noticed the tension leaving his shoulders, the way he smiled more easily, how he started joining her for breakfast instead of just coffee. On the 21st day, Antonio knocked on her cottage door just after dawn. Marco wants to see you in the study. Nina's stomach dropped. Is something wrong? No, Antonio actually smiled. I think it's good news. Marco was standing by the window when she entered, hands in his pockets, looking out at the sunrise. He'd rolled up his sleeves, and there was a coffee cup on his desk, half empty. It's done, he said without turning around. The Castellanos are finished. Nina exhaled shakily. Finished how? Vincent is facing 30 years. His sons are fighting each other for whatever scraps are left. Their assets are frozen. Their connections have all distanced themselves. Marco turned to face her. They have no power. No reach. They can't hurt you. Just like that? Not just like that. It took 20 years of knowing where the bodies were buried. Metaphorically speaking, he moved closer, his expression serious. I need you to understand something, Nina. What I did, it wasn't clean. I made deals with people who aren't good. I traded information I swore I'd never use.
I pollastrings I promisa I decut.
You did it to protect me. I did it because I was selfish. Marco's voice was quiet but firm. Because the thought of them scaring you, threatening you, touching you. He stopped, jaw tight. I told myself I was done with that life. But the truth is, I'm only done when it doesn't matter to me. And you matter. The words hung in the air between them. Nina's breath caught. Marco. You don't have to say anything. He moved back to his desk, creating distance. The cottage is yours as long as you want it.
The job too.
But if you'd rather leave now that it's safe, I understand. I can have Rosa drive you. I don't want to leave. Marco stopped. You should think about it. I have been thinking about it. For 3 weeks, Nina stepped toward him. Every morning I wake up in that cottage, I think about leaving. And every morning I decide to stay. Why? Because you make me feel safe.
Because you listen when I talk.
Because you're terrible at dicing tomatoes and you smile when I correct you. Because I'm not finished learning the kitchen yet, Nina said instead. It was safer than the truth. Marco studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly.
Okay, he said.
Then stay. Neither of them acknowledged what was really happening. Not yet. Spring turned to early summer, and the estate came alive. Luca's vegetable garden exploded with tomatoes, zucchini, and peppers. Rosa started leaving flowers on Nina's cottage doorstep, just because. Sophia came by more often, painting in the garden while Nina cooked, filling the air with turpentine smell and easy conversation. And Marco. Marco was different. The weight he'd carried for weeks, maybe years, had lifted. He laughed more, lingered longer over meals, started doing small, unexpected things. Like the morning Nina found him in the kitchen at dawn, attempting to make coffee for her. You're up early, she said from the doorway, startling him. Marco turned, looking almost guilty. The espresso machine was hissing ominously. I thought, since you always make coffee for everyone else. That's sweet. But you're about to break my machine. Am I? Nina moved beside him, adjusted the grind setting, showed him the proper tamp pressure. They stood close enough that she could smell his soap, something clean and cedar. Like this, she murmured, guiding his hand. Marco was very still. I'm a terrible student. You're attentive. That's different. The coffee came out perfect. They split it, sitting on the terrace as the sun rose over the valley. not talking, just existing in the same space. It became a routine. Dawn coffee. Quiet conversation. The world waking up around them. Then came the afternoon. Marco insisted on helping her shop for ingredients. You don't need to, Nina started. I want to see where you source things, Marco interrupted. Call it professional curiosity. They took his car, a sleek but understated sedan, to the farmer's market downtown. Nina was nervous at first, remembering the night market incident. But Marco moved through the crowds with casual confidence, one hand occasionally at the small of her back, guiding her around obstacles. Try this, she said at a cheese vendor, offering him a sample of aged pecorino. Marco took it, his fingers brushing hers. Good. Just good. Excellent. Better? She grinned. You're impossible to impress. Not true, his eyes held hers. You impress me constantly. Nina's cheeks flushed. She turned quickly to the vendor. We'll take half a wheel. That night, she cooked dinner using everything they'd bought together. Fresh pasta with cherry tomatoes, the pecorino, basil from Luca's garden. Simple and perfect. Marco ate slowly, savoring each bite. My mother used to say you could taste the care in food, he said quietly. I never understood what she meant until now. Nina's throat tightened. Tell me about her.
So he did.
About Sunday dinners that lasted hours. About her singing in the kitchen. About how she died when he was 17 and how he'd lost his way after that. I made choices I can't undo, Marco said, staring at his wine glass. Hurt people. Became someone she wouldn't recognize. But you got out. Too late. No, Nina reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Not too late. You're here now. That counts. Marco turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. Neither of them pulled away. The days blurred together in the best way. Marco teaching her chess on rainy afternoons. She was terrible at it, but he never got frustrated. Nina teaching him to make fresh pasta. He was terrible at it, but she never got frustrated. Walking the property at sunset, their shoulders occasionally bumping. The night they got caught in a sudden summer storm and ran laughing to the cottage, both soaked through. Nina made hot chocolate while Marco started a fire in the fireplace. They sat on the floor, wrapped in blankets, talking until midnight about everything, childhood dreams, biggest regrets, favorite books. I used to want to open my own restaurant, Nina admitted. Somewhere small, where people felt at home.
Why didn't you? Money.
Confidence. Fear, she shrugged. Pick one. Marco was quiet for a moment. What if you had all three? Then I'd still be terrified.
Good.
Fear means it matters. Nina looked at him, his face lit by firelight, expression soft in a way she'd never seen that first night at the rooftop bar. When did you get so wise? She asked. I'm not wise. I'm just old enough to regret not taking chances. Their eyes met, and something shifted. The air felt heavier, charged. Marco reached up, gently brushing a damp curl away from Nina's face. His hand lingered against her cheek. Nina. A log cracked in the fireplace, sending up sparks. The moment broke. Marco pulled back, clearing his throat. It's late. You should rest.
Right.
Yeah, Nina stood quickly, fumbling with her blanket. Thank you for. Today was good. It was. She left, closing the cottage door behind her, leaning against it with her heart racing. In the main house, Marco sat alone by the dying fire and wondered how much longer he could pretend he wasn't falling for her. The next morning, something had changed. Nina felt at the moment she walked into the main kitchen. Marco was already there, unusual, since she normally arrived first, standing by the window with his coffee, staring out at nothing. Morning, she said tentatively. Morning, he didn't turn around. Rosa left pastries. Help yourself. His tone was polite, distant. Nina's stomach sank. She busied herself with prep work, hyper-aware of the silence. Marco finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and left without another word. It continued for days. Marco stopped coming to the kitchen while she cooked. Stopped having morning coffee on the terrace. When they did cross paths, he was cordial but removed, asking about supplies, commenting on the weather, then disappearing into his study.
Roza noticed.
Did you two fight? She asked on the fourth day, folding linens while Nina aggressively chopped vegetables.
No.
I don't know. Maybe. Nina set down her knife. He's avoiding me. Marco doesn't avoid. He strategizes, Rosa sighed. That man thinks too much. Always has. About what? You'd have to ask him. But Nina couldn't. Every time she tried to approach him, Marco found a reason to leave. A phone call to take. Papers to review. Somewhere else to be. By the end of the week, Nina was exhausted from the emotional whiplash. The casual intimacy they'd built, the coffee, the conversations, the almost moment by the fire, had evaporated like it had never existed. She found herself crying in the cottage one night, angry at herself for caring so much, for letting her guard down, for believing someone like Marco could actually want someone like her. The cruel voice in her head sounded like her ex, like Jake from the blind date. Of course, he pulled away. What did you expect? On Sunday, Nina made Marco's favorite meal, the lemon chicken from her first day, the one that had gotten her the job. She plated it carefully, left it in the warming drawer with a note, for whenever you're hungry. She didn't wait around to see if he ate it. Instead, she packed a small bag and took the bus back to the city. Not permanently, just for the night. She needed space, perspective, distance from the constant ache of being near someone who decided she wasn't worth being near. Her old apartment had been sublet, but her friend Maya had a couch. You look like hell, Maya said when she opened the door. I feel like hell. They ordered takeout, and Nina told her everything. The blind date.
Marco.
The Castellanos. The cottage. The almost kiss that had broken everything. He's pulling away because he's scared, Maya said matter-of-factly, stabbing at her low mane. Of what? Of wanting you. Men like that, powerful, controlled, they're terrified of anything they can't manage. And feelings? Can't manage those. So what do? You decide what you want. Then you tell him.
Directly.
No games, Maya pointed her chopsticks at Nina. But first, you figure out if this is real, or if you're just grateful he wasn't a dick to you. That stopped Nina cold.
Was that it?
Was she confusing kindness with connection? Safety with love? She spent the night awake on Maya's couch, turning the question over and over. By morning, she had her answer. What she felt for Marco wasn't gratitude. It was want. Real, terrifying, complicated want. She wanted his rare smiles. His terrible cooking attempts. The way he listened like her words actually mattered. She wanted the version of himself he showed her when he thought no one was keeping score. But did he want her? Nina returned to the estate Monday morning, resolved to ask him directly. The kitchen was empty. So was the study, the terrace. She found Antonio in the garage, polishing one of the cars. Where's Marco? She asked. Antonio looked uncomfortable. He left this morning. Didn't say where. Nina's chest tightened. When will he be back? He didn't say. She wandered back to the cottage, feeling hollowed out. On the small table by the door sat an envelope with her name on it. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a check, 3 months' salary, and a note in Marco's precise handwriting. Nina, take the time you need. The cottage is yours regardless. I've made arrangements for Rosa to continue driving you if you choose to return, or to help you find a new position if you prefer. I'm sorry for the distance. It isn't about you. It's about me recognizing that your presence here might not be entirely your choice. You came because you needed safety and income. You stayed, perhaps, for the same reasons. I need to know that if you're here, it's because you want to be. Not because you feel obligated. Not because you're afraid to leave. But because you choose this. I'm not asking you to choose now. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself about what you want. The kitchen, and everything else, will be here when you decide. Nina read it 3 times. Then she sat down on the cottage steps and let out a laugh that was half sob. He thought she was staying out of obligation. Out of fear. He thought she didn't choose him. Marco Moretti, the man who dismantled an entire crime family to protect her, had no idea that she'd already decided. That she'd chosen him weeks ago. Nina looked at the check. At the note. At the cottage surrounded by jasmine and morning light. Then she pulled out her phone. "Where are you?" she typed. No response. She tried calling. Straight to voicemail. "Damn it, Marco," she whispered. Rosa appeared from the main house, worry creasing her face. "He does this sometimes," she said gently. "Disappears when he needs to think. He'll come back." "When?" Rosa shook her head. "I don't know, Mija. But when he does," she squeezed Nina's shoulder. "Make sure he knows the truth." Nina nodded, throat tight. She just hoped she'd get the chance. For days. Marco had been gone for 4 days, and Nina was going out of her mind. She cooked anyway, elaborate meals no one asked for. Rosa and the others ate them gratefully but quietly, watching her with concerned eyes. Luca tried to distract her with garden tours. Sophia brought wine and sat with her in silence. Nothing helped. On the 5th evening, dark clouds rolled in from the coast. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Nina stood on the cottage porch, watching lightning fork across the sky. Marco's note crumpled in her pocket from being read too many times. She couldn't do this anymore. The waiting. The uncertainty. She grabbed her jacket and her phone. Texted Rosa, "I'm going home for a few days. I need to think." Rosa replied immediately, "Stay safe, Mija. The storm's getting worse." Nina didn't care. She needed movement. Distance. Something other than this paralyzing limbo. The bus into the city was nearly empty. Rain pelted the windows. Nina pressed her forehead against a glass, watching the world blur past, trying not to think about Marco's hands when he'd brushed the curl from her face. His voice when he'd said "you impress me" constantly. The way he'd looked at her by the firelight like she was something precious. And then how he'd disappeared like none of it mattered. The bus dropped her at the central station downtown. She'd catch the crosstown line to Maya's place. Wait out the storm. Figure out her next move. She was halfway across the platform when she saw him. Marco stood near the opposite entrance, rain-soaked, staring at the departure board like it might give him answers. He wore dark jeans and a jacket she'd never seen before. His hair was wet, curling slightly at the edges. He looked exhausted. Nina's heart stopped. She must have made a sound. A gasp, a sob, something, because Marco's head snapped around. Their eyes met across the crowded platform. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Marco was walking toward her, fast, purposeful. Nina met him halfway. They stopped 3 feet apart, close enough to touch, far enough to run. "What are you doing here?" Nina asked, her voice barely audible over the rain hammering the station's glass roof. "I could ask you the same thing." Marco's eyes searched her face. "Rosa said you left. You left first." "I know." He ran a hand through his wet hair, frustrated. "I needed to think. To give you space." "I don't want space." The words burst out of Nina before she could stop them. "I want to know why you disappeared. Why you wrote me that check like you were paying me off. Why you suddenly decided I was only there because I had nowhere else to go. Because it's true, isn't it?" Marco's voice was raw. "I offered you safety and money when you were desperate. You accepted because you needed both. How am I supposed to know if you'd stay if you had other options? Maybe you could have asked me instead of running away." "I didn't run. You left without saying goodbye. Without explaining. You just vanished and left me a note like I was an employee you were firing." Thunder cracked overhead. People on the platform glanced at them nervously, giving them space. Marco stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I left because I was terrified, Nina. Because every morning I woke up and you were there, in my kitchen, in my home, in my head, and I wanted you to stay so badly it scared me. Because for the first time in 20 years, I wanted something I couldn't take or buy or negotiate for. Nina's breath caught. And then I realized, Marco continued, his eyes locked on hers, that everything I'd given you, the job, the cottage, the protection, it was all leverage. Even if I didn't mean it that way. How could you say no to me? How could you leave? You had nothing. I had everything. That's not a choice. That's coercion. That's bullshit. Nina's voice shook with anger and something deeper. You want to know why I stayed? Not because of the cottage or the money, or because I was afraid to leave. I stayed because you listened when I talked about my grandmother's kitchen. Because you were terrible at dicing tomatoes and you let me teach you anyway. Because you looked at me, really looked at me, and didn't see something broken that needed fixing. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. I stayed because of you, Marco. The man who drove across the city at midnight when I was scared. Who dismantled an entire criminal organization because someone threatened me. Who makes terrible coffee and thinks he's fooling anyone. A small, broken sound escaped Marco, half laugh, half something else. I stayed, Nina continued, her voice steady now, sure, because I chose you. Not the estate. Not the safety. You. And if you'd asked me instead of deciding for me what I wanted, you would have known that. The rain pounded harder against the glass roof. Announcements echoed through the station. Somewhere a train was departing. Marco reached up slowly, cupping Nina's face with both hands. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, gentle, reverent. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. Just, Nina's voice broke. Don't leave again. Not like that. Never. Promise me. I promise. Then Marco kissed her. It wasn't hesitant or questioning. It was sure, a decision made, a wall torn down. Nina's hands fisted in his jacket, pulling him closer. She could taste rain on his lips, feel the thundering of his heart against her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marco pressed his forehead to hers. Come home, he murmured. Nina smiled, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. I thought you'd never ask. He kissed her again, softer this time, like a promise. Around them, the storm raged on. Neither of them noticed. They didn't go back to the estate that night. Instead, Marco took Nina to a small hotel near the station. Nothing fancy, just clean and warm and dry. They needed neutral ground, a place that belonged to neither of them. In the modest room, they sat on opposite ends of the bed, still in damp clothes, and talked. Really talked. I need to tell you something, Marco said, hands clasped between his knees. About why I really left. Nina waited. I went to see my sister. She lives 3 hours north. We don't talk often. I needed someone who knew me before everything got complicated. He paused. I told her about you, about how I felt, and she asked me a question I couldn't answer. What question? She asked what I was offering you. Really offering you. Marco met Nina's eyes. Because a job and a cottage and protection, those are things I give to employees, to people I'm responsible for. But if I wanted more than that, if I wanted you to be part of my life, really part of it, what was I giving you? What future? Nina's throat tightened. I'm 46 years old, Marco continued quietly. I have a past that doesn't go away. Money from sources I'm not proud of. Connections to people who aren't good. I can't give you normalcy. Can't promise you safety beyond what I've already done. And asking you to build a life around that felt selfish. So, you decided for both of us that it wouldn't work? I decided I needed to be honest about what I could offer, which felt like nothing. Nina shifted closer, taking his hand. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you? Marco nodded, almost afraid. I see someone who got out, who chose to walk away from power when most people can't. Someone who grows olive trees and makes terrible coffee and reads poetry when he thinks no one's watching. She squeezed his hand. I see someone who's trying to be good, even though the world never asked him to be. Nina. I'm not finished, her voice was firm. You think you don't have anything to offer me? Marco, you gave me my life back. Not because of the money or the cottage, though those helped. You gave me back the belief that I deserved kindness, that my cooking mattered, that I was worth listening to. Marco's jaw tightened with emotion. I don't need normal, Nina said. I had normal. Normal was working 3 jobs and barely surviving. Normal was men like Jake who looked at me like I was defective. I don't want that. What do you want? Something real. Something we build together. She moved closer until their knees touched. I'm not naive. I know your past is complicated, but I also know you've spent 3 years trying to leave it behind. And I want to help you do that. Not as someone you need to protect, but as someone who chooses to stand next to you. Marco pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. Nina felt him shaking just slightly and realized he was crying. Silent, decades-old relief finally finding its way out. I don't deserve you, he whispered. That's not your choice to make. He laughed, wet and broken and real. You're terrifying, you know that.
Good.
Someone needs to keep you honest. They stayed like that until their clothes dried, and exhaustion pulled them toward sleep. Marco insisted Nina take the bed. He'd take the chair. Don't be ridiculous, Nina said, already under the covers. We're adults. You can sleep on top of the blankets if it makes you feel proper.
So he did.
They lay in the darkness, not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth.
Marco.
Nina whispered.
M.
What happens now? He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that. The estate, it's beautiful, but it's tied to my old life. The people who sold it to me. The reasons I bought it. I don't want to live in the shadow of who I was. What do you want? Something smaller. Somewhere we could start fresh. He turned his head toward her. Have you ever been to the coast? The northern coast, where it's quiet?
Once.
When I was little. There's a town up there. Small, nothing fancy. I saw a property for sale, an old restaurant right on the water. Closed for years, needs work. He paused. I thought maybe, if you wanted, we could buy it, fix it up, open something of our own. Nina's heart stuttered. You want to open a restaurant? With me? I want to build something that isn't about my past or your survival. Something we create together because we want to, not because we have to. Marco reached over, finding her hand in the darkness. You run the kitchen. I handle the business side. We make it small enough to manage, good enough to matter. That's a huge risk. I know. We might fail. Probably. We barely know each other. Then we'll learn. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I spent 20 years taking what I wanted through force. I want to try building something the right way. With someone who makes me want to be better. Nina turned toward him, even though she could barely see his face in the darkness. Yes, she whispered. Yes.
Yes.
Let's do it. Let's build something real. Marco pulled her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. Thank you, he murmured. For what? For choosing me back. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and glittering. Inside, 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage began to dream about what they could build from the pieces. 6 months later, Nina stood in front of a weather-worn building perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The sign above the door read Lim1 in simple, elegant script, Italian for lemon. A private joke between her and Marco, a callback to the lemon chicken that had started everything. It's perfect, she breathed. Marco came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. It's a disaster. The kitchen needs to be completely rebuilt. The dining room has water damage. The deck is one strong wind away from collapsing into the ocean. So it's perfect, Nina repeated, grinning. He kissed her temple. You're insane. You love it. I love you. The words still felt new enough to make her heart skip. He'd said them first 3 months ago, while they were reviewing architectural plans at 2 a.m. Just casual, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Nina had cried, then kissed him, then made him say it again. Now, she turned in his arms. Say it again. You're insane. She swatted his chest. The other thing. Marco smiled, the full, unguarded smile he saved only for her. I love you, Nina Castellano. She'd taken his name 2 weeks ago. Not married. Not yet, but legally changed. A choice she'd made freely, despite his protests that she didn't have to. I want to, she'd said simply. I want to choose your name the way I chose you. The restaurant had taken every bit of Marco's remaining savings and most of Nina's courage. They'd sold the estate. Rosa and Antonio had both retired with generous pensions. Luca had started his own landscaping business, and Sofia had been gifted the cottage as a studio. They'd moved into a small apartment above the restaurant space. 2 rooms, a bathroom with temperamental plumbing, and a view of the ocean that made up for everything. And they'd gotten to work. Marco had thrown himself into the renovation with surprising enthusiasm. He learned to use power tools, to patch drywall, to negotiate with contractors. Nina designed the kitchen layout, fought with suppliers, tested recipes until their apartment smelled permanently of garlic and fresh bread. They argued sometimes about tile choices, about menu pricing, about whether to have 18 or 24 seats. But they learned each other's rhythms. When to push, when to yield, when to simply sit on the unfinished deck and share a bottle of wine while the sun set. Rosa visited often, usually bringing Antonio. They'd installed themselves as unofficial advisors, Rosa weighing in on decor, while Antonio handled security systems with the same seriousness he'd once used for the estate. You need cameras, he'd insisted. Antonio, we're a restaurant, not a fortress, Marco had laughed. You're my family. You get cameras. The soft opening was set for tonight, just friends, family, a handful of locals. The real opening would come next week, but Nina needed this. Needed to cook for people who loved her before she faced strangers. Now, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Nina and Marco stood in their completed restaurant for the first time. The dining room was small, 16 tables scattered across warm wooden floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the ocean. String lights crisscrossed the ceiling, waiting to be lit. Fresh flowers sat in simple glass vases. Everything was clean, minimal, welcoming. The kitchen gleamed. Copper pots hung from hooks. The stove was professional grade. Herbs grew in boxes by the window. Basil, rosemary, thyme. I can't believe we did this, Nina whispered. We haven't done anything yet. We still have to cook.
Right. Cook.
I can do that, but her hands were shaking. Marco caught them, steadied them.
Hey.
Look at me.
She did.
You're the best cook I know. These people are coming because they love us and because they trust you. Just cook the way you always do, with heart. The rest doesn't matter. Nina nodded, breathing slowly. The guests arrived at 6. Rosa and Antonio, both dressed up, Rosa immediately crying. Luca and Sofia bringing wine and hugs. Detective Rains, surprisingly, with her wife. She and Marco had stayed in touch, mutual respect replacing old antagonism. Maya, Nina's friend from the city, who'd helped her survive those early, desperate months. And others, neighbors from the town, the contractor who'd worked on the space, the fisherman who'd promised Nina first pick of his daily catch. 16 people who'd become family in different ways. Nina cooked the meal she knew best, simple, honest food. The lemon chicken from her first day at the estate. Fresh pasta with local clams. Roasted vegetables from Luca's new garden. A tiramisu that made Rosa cry again. Marco worked the dining room, pouring wine, laughing with guests, his shoulders relaxed in a way they'd never been at the estate. Between courses, Nina stepped out onto the deck for air. The ocean stretched endless before her, darkening as the sun melted into it. Waves crashed against rocks below. Salt air filled her lungs. Marco found her there, slipping an arm around her waist. They love it, he said quietly. Rosa's already planning to come back next week with her entire church group. God help us. He laughed, then turned her to face him. The last rays of sunlight caught his face, highlighting the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes when he smiled. "Dance with me," he said. "There's no music. There's always music." So they danced on their unfinished deck, above the crashing waves, while inside their restaurant, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. No one had saved anyone. They'd met in the ruins of who they'd been and built something new together. Something real. Something theirs. Nina rested her head against Marco's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and smiled. This strange, imperfect, beautiful life was worth every risk. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For asking me about the tiramisu." Marco laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Best decision I ever made." Inside, Rosa called for them. Time for dessert, time for toasts. But they stayed a moment longer, swaying in the fading light. Two people who'd been rejected and broken and lost. Now found.
The end.